We're extremely fortunate and very excited to welcome today's presenters, Dr. Raymond Kuo, Dr. Ana Maria Ortiz, and Dr. Derek Stafford, and Dr. Andrea Jones-Rooy. I'm going to give a brief introduction of each of them. I could go on for quite a long time, but I will try to be brief. And then the presenters will have several minutes. I think I told them 7, maybe 8. And then we'll have time for a discussion and Q&A after. So Dr. Raymond Kuo is a senior political scientist and director of the Taiwan Policy Initiative at RAND Corporation. He's an expert on international security, international order, and East Asia, and the author of 2 books and numerous articles in international security, the Journal of Conflict Resolution, Foreign Affairs, Foreign Policy, and War on the Rocks. Dr. Kuo's PhD from Princeton University and a Master's of Science in International Relations from London School of Economics, BA in Politics, Economics, and History from Wesleyan, and previously worked for Fordham University, the United Nations, the National Democratic Institute, and the Democratic Progressive Party of Taiwan. Dr. Ana Maria Ortiz is the director of the U.S. Government Accountability Office's Natural Resources and Environment team, where she oversees GAO's portfolio focused on Native American and tribal issues. Dr. Ortiz joined GAO in 2005 as a statistician for GAO's Applied Research and Methods team, and she specialized in multivariate statistical modeling, complex data analysis, and provided guidance on research design and fraud detection methodologies for GAO's forensic units and investigative services team. Dr. Ortiz also served as acting director of GAO's Financial Markets and Community Investment team, and she's an adjunct faculty member with GAO's Learning Center, where she taught courses in statistical modeling, sampling, and diversity and inclusion. Before joining GAO, she was a civil rights analyst at the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights and a study director at the Institute for Social Research at the University of Michigan, where she earned her PhD and MA in political science from U of M. And I'm really, really happy to see Ana Maria again, as she was one of my first students here at U of M, one of our first students. And Dr. Ortiz also has a bachelor's in political economy from Princeton, but who cares about Princeton? Dr. Derek Stafford is a research analytics leader with expertise in statistics, research design, and behavioral science. He has led cross-functional teams at Meta, in WhatsApp, healthcare, and tech startups in government agencies, delivering insights that shape products, strategy, and customer experience. Derek currently directs research and data science at Sensis, where he also oversees AI development for synthetic data. His PhD is also from the University of Michigan, and he has conducted global public health research with Yale, the Gates Foundation, and USAID, RIP. Derek is passionate about using data to drive impact through scientific rigor and clear storytelling. Finally, Dr. Andrea Jones-Rooy is a political and data scientist on a mission to get everyone in the world to think like a scientist about our thorniest social issues. Formerly a professor and director of undergraduate studies at NYU Center for Data Science, Andrea now leads Off the Map Productions, a company aimed at sharing the good news about thoughtful quantification with the world. Specifically, Andrea is a research consultant and keynote speaker for global Fortune 500s, tech companies, nonprofits, government organizations, and more, including the UN, where she helps organizations use quantitative social science to more thoughtfully and effectively evaluate performance, talent, engagement, adaptability, innovation, and more. Once upon a time, Andrea was also a student of ours. But once upon a time, Andrea was also a quantitative researcher at Nate Silver's former 538, again, RIP. Andrea also hosts the podcast Behind the Data, regularly gives sold-out public lectures across NYC on her favorite topics in political science. Somehow she sells out talks on political science. I wanted to re-emphasize that. And when she's not doing all these things, she's an internationally touring stand-up comedian and circus performer, and I'm not even kidding. And so then we will start it off with Raymond. Yeah, you get to go first.
Thank you all so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be back and speaking with ICPSR once again. We were asked to give some brief remarks about non-academic careers. So I'll just start off with a few kind of general principles. The first thing is that well, maybe I'll start off this way, that leaving academia, I was a professor at Fordham and SUNY Albany before that, but leaving academia, I think perhaps the hardest part of it is the identity issue. We have this very strong academic socialization that your personal identity becomes both your professional one. How can you be a political scientist and social scientist if you aren't actually teaching? But I think and it took me a long time to realize that, it doesn't actually matter. You are going to be a social scientist. When you walk out with that PhD, you will be a social scientist regardless of what you do. You will always carry that credential with you. And so to some extent, it's just getting over that kind of socialized hurdle and realizing that quite a lot of value in non-academic positions. So better pay, better work-life balance, you have more impact. 100% of what you do, at least, or much higher percentage of what you do will actually be related to your compensation and your advancement. Whereas in academia, it really just comes down to your research output. And the, majority of our time spent on teaching, on admin stuff, just doesn't really count all that much. So a couple principles I'd like to start off with. First is that know your value. You're a social scientist regardless of where you are. And you're already sitting here in this room a better quantitative analyst than like 95% of the population that's out there. Uh, so, if not higher. So know the fact that you actually have very, very good methodologies, even though you're surrounded by people who have even better ones. Secondly, it's important for people in academia, or even if you decide to stay in academia, look at what the non-academic market will actually pay you. It's important for you to actually know what your value and what you're giving up. What is your choice set? What is your opportunity cost? You know, are you really willing to live in are you willing to live in, the middle of nowhere teaching at a small school? Or would you actually rather, when you know that you could be making double the amount of money outside of academia? If the answer to that is yes, that's perfectly fine. But it's important for you to understand what you're actually giving up, what your alternative opportunity is, what your opportunity cost actually is when you're making these decisions. Next, if you're thinking about leaving academic or taking a non-academic path, you're going to have to engage in translation. By which I mean the standard HR person is not going to have any idea what to do with you. You are highly min-maxed. You are extremely good at research. You're extremely good at methodology. You're probably pretty crap at administration and program development and strategy. So you have some, it's very like you need to translate your skill set into something that's legible for the outside world. And that's okay. You can, you'll be able to do it. Emphasize those research skills, emphasize those methodologies, but also recognize that you may have to it's useful in some cases to get experience in other areas where you kind of to fill in some of the gaps in terms of your skill sets, administrative work, program development, that kind of thing. Um, you know, networking is pretty key. Most jobs are gotten not through just cold emails or cold applications, but actually going out there, talking to people, demonstrating your value, and developing that network over time. That is really where a lot of the especially medium term, sorry, not entry level positions like mid-career positions come, but it's also really, really useful at the entry-level position as well. And the last thing I'll say is that be kind to yourself. Uh, the job market is really hard, both academic and non-academic. Don't get caught up thinking that your life is your job search. There are a lot of really smart people outside of academia. Make sure you're nice to them, and then leverage the networks and communities that you have to advance yourself to the place that you want to be. When my wife and I were considering moving, I live in Minneapolis. We were considering moving out here for her career. She sat me down and said, okay, I have a 15-year plan for genuine wealth creation. And it blew my mind because I was like, wait a minute. All the means, ways, ends analysis that we conduct on to analyze, political actors, we can actually apply it to ourselves in our own careers. And that was like, oh, what a revelation. So take some time to do that for yourself, understand your value, and then again, be kind to yourself. The job search isn't everything in your life. And it's important to have a better sense of what you want to do and then pursuing the career path that will get you there.
Thank you, Raymond. Next, we're going to go to Ana Maria Ortiz.
Great. Thanks so much, Rob. Those were some great points, and I'll elaborate on a couple, but just to give you a sense of a little bit in the life of a non-academic. So one of the biggest myths of academia is that you need to do it yourself in order for it to be done right. If you are at the right kind of organization and you have the right kind of team, you can have a fantastic experience. And even better, you can leverage other people's skills to make better outcomes. And that is what I'm doing a lot of the day to day. I'm working with individual evaluation and audit teams, and we're thinking about evidence. We're doing interviews. We might be collecting data. And then I'm reviewing reports. I'm looking for logical flow. I'm looking for methodological sufficiency. And also, what value is this going to bring to our client, which is Congress, our primary client. I also spend my days answering press inquiries. Sometimes an exciting day, I'll be doing a congressional testimony, but the day-to-day work is really about people. And that has been one of the most gratifying things about working at GAO and with the teams I work with in particular. I think a lot of people stay in academic careers for the wrong reasons. Maybe their advisor really expects them to, or they love being a student and learning and can't envision a world in which they're not going to be able to learn constantly on a job. Maybe it's that they really don't think there are a ton of smart people out there. That's one of those myths academics like to tell, is that there aren't smart people in other places. And that's not true. Know that if you stay in academia, you're doing so for a choice. You are making that choice. And really what you are doing now as an academic in graduate school, all of those skills you are learning are applicable elsewhere as well, and they have value elsewhere as well. I think what Ray said about the marketing and learning how to use kind of those keywords and things, it really is about selling the skills you have. So if you are a TA, you have done small group facilitation and performance feedback. If you are someone who has done regression analysis, you can really parlay that into something, but really think about what the employer on the other end wants and figure out how to translate it for them. Find out what you value in a job. And by that, I mean much more than, hey, can I do remote work? Or, what is the compensation or the bonuses? It's really about finding the organization that works for you. And you don't need to stay there. Some people stay at organizations for a long time, but you can get different things from different jobs. And when you find an organization that supports you, supports your growth, encourages really a learning mindset throughout your career, that's a very valuable thing. For me, I also found that after my first couple of jobs, one of the things I valued most was the sense that management has my back. That's a really important feeling. And now that I am management, that's one of the things I really want to impart to my staff. I also really appreciate that we are expected to contribute everything at work when we're at work, but when we're not at work, we have our lives. And I very much value a culture that thinks about the future, thinks about implications, and isn't kind of run in this chaotic way. I had a job interview once at a company run by a couple of political scientists, brilliant people. And they had a fabulous company, and they offered me more than a 50% pay increase. But the CEO spent 3 hours at an interview with me when it was clear things were falling apart around it. And I thought, this is not the organization that knows how to balance its time. This is not an organization that realizes that, yes, maybe I'll interact with the CEO, once every few months, but he certainly doesn't need to spend 3 hours with me. I think the last thing is there are federal jobs that are not subject to the whims of the executive branch or to the waves of policy changes. And I'm lucky to be at one of those agencies. I work for Congress. I work in a nonpartisan environment. I work for both sides of the aisles, and facts are our business. If you do decide to look for federal work, there are lots of jobs that leverage the skills you are developing right now. But to get to a federal job, you need to learn how to apply for a federal job. And there are tricks to that. So don't think you can just walk in and do your academic hand waving and like, I know all these things. Like that person in HR, as it's been said, is not going to know how to translate this into, do you have the skill needed to do this specific job? So those are a few thoughts, and I'll pause there.
Thank you, Anna Maria. And next we'll have Derek Stafford.
So thank you, Rob, for inviting me to talk on the subject. It's actually something that I was really excited to hear about and was thrilled when you invited me, in part because when I made my transition from an academic career to the business world, I didn't really think there was anything out there for me. I didn't know about the opportunities that existed for me and how my skill sets could translate to business. I also didn't know much about the difficulties that would be waiting there making that transition, because it's not always, even though you have a skill set that makes you valuable, there's also a lot of other things you need to learn along the way too. And so I'm thrilled to be able to let people know that there are a lot of other opportunities out there for you if you choose to go a different path. And also like some of the difficulties await you and how you can help deal with those. First, I'd like to talk a little bit about like my story. So I was a postdoc at Yale, and my postdoc was funded by the Gates Foundation. So I was basically traveling around the developing world with like 6 weeks in the developing world, and like reviewing different, like basically doing project evaluation for Gates program for Gates Foundation programs. And then I'd have like 1 week back at Yale, then 6 weeks out of the country. And it was a bit of a exhausting life, but I really enjoyed it and made a lot of important social connections, felt like I was doing valuable work. But at a certain point, while living in Honduras, I met my wife, and I was like, hey, I probably need to have a more stable income and more stable experience than this, and try to do different stuff. And professorships just I didn't feel like I had a strong enough case for it at that point. So I wanted to explore other options. And I thought the only path for me was government. So I looked up a bunch of places that had jobs for statisticians. Thankfully, I was able to get one very quickly at the Department of Commerce, and did that for a couple of years. And this was around 2016, 17, 18, where you might remember we had Donald Trump's first term. And it was difficult getting my wife into the country during Donald Trump's first term. So I, vented about it on Facebook, and it was like, hey, like where am I going to go now? Like, now I need to try to find another job in the middle of what was a recession at the time. And I have a friend of mine who also has her PhD in political science, but from UC San Diego, her name Nicole Bonoff. She's like, hey, Derek, would you like to work at Facebook? And I swear to you, my direct response to her was like, why would Facebook want me to work for them? Like, it didn't compute for me. I didn't understand what I did that was of any value to them. And so Facebook gave me, like, within like a week of her messaging me, Facebook gave me a bunch of tests that, like, essentially, if you have passed, like, 699 with Rob, like, there's no way you don't do well on these tests. Like, if you can get through 699 with Rob, you can get a job at Facebook. It's just that simple. And I apparently scored high enough that they put my wife and I on a plane to London, and we began working in London for Meta. I was working for WhatsApp for them as a senior quantitative researcher. And it was a whirlwind experience. And I assumed, given that my title was researcher, that meant it was my job to do research. And that is true. It is your job to do research, but research in the business world is very different than research in the academic setting. First thing is, it requires a great deal more of project management. And so part of what that means is, like, I worked across 5 different cross-functional teams, which means I would be doing research for 5 different teams at the same time. And at any given time, in any given quarter, I would probably have between 7 to 12 different research projects that were going on. And so that's not that's not something I think is too customary in academia. Maybe Rob has that issue, but most academics normally are not juggling that many things. And so that ability to juggle them all and push each thing each day a little bit closer to the finish line, and not lose track of deadlines, which also another thing for academics who are making the transition. Deadlines are super important. Dates are super important. Like you can't just be like, I haven't finished that analysis yet. You really need to deliver on time for these things. So project management is one of the biggest difficulties you'll face in the transition. There's another one too, which is there's a trade-off between speed and uncertainty. Stakeholders want answers quickly. They want them as fast as they possibly can. And of course, with more time, with more data, with more cost, you can be more certain about the conclusions that you provide to them. But there's a trade-off with speed. And so you have to be able to balance and understand, like, what do I really need to take my time with because we need a really high level of certainty on? And what should I just get done really quickly? Because more or less they need to know yes or no, and they need to know today or tomorrow, right? And then there's another challenge that comes with that, which is not only do you have to balance between speed and uncertainty, but you have to figure out the right way to communicate your level of uncertainty to people who don't necessarily have a background in statistics. And that can also be quite challenging. You also need to work very hard at being able to communicate statistics to individuals who don't have a background in statistics. And ultimately, that's your job, is to break through and make the communication and communicate on their level. I remember one time I did a project for Meta where endogeneity was super important for the conclusions that we would develop. And so I did a whole bunch of complicated analysis to try to tease out where causality was most likely flowing from. I know causality isn't real, Rob, but like where it was most likely flowing from. And I did all of this complicated analysis. And then when I got to the final slide, I'm like, look, the causality probably moves in this direction. Just believe me. And then I had a technical appendix where I put all the analysis I'd done for the past 2 weeks that I've been working so hard on this thing about. I put it in the technical appendix, but I'm just like, just trust me on this one. Like, you can observe, you can look at it if you want, but just trust me and believe me. Finally, the job doesn't end with research. I think in the business world, that's really key. Like, you're not just there to present findings. You're there to present conclusions, and you need to present actionable recommendations that flow from those conclusions. Finally, you don't just stop there. You then need to go make sure that those recommendations are carried through, because that's what impact is. If you do research and no one changes any behavior based on that, your research had no value at all. And so in the academic world, there's this value for publishing information and data and research and that contributing to overall science. That's not good enough in the business world. You have to make sure that there is some impact and change that occurs. Finally, this notion of teacher. There's a lot of different roles you have to play. I'm currently director of research and analytics, which means I have a team of 7 below me. And so I'm a manager now as well. And that's actually where I found I still get to be a teacher, right? That's one of the great things about it, is there's a lot of different styles for being a manager. And I found the one that works best for me is being a teacher, because that's the one that I was best at and I enjoyed doing. And so, like, yes, as a teacher, you have certain systems of accountability and a setup. Sometimes you need to have hard conversations with people who work for you. But generally speaking, it's your job to educate. It's your job to teach. It's your job to show people the right way to do things so that you can step back and leave them alone and let them flourish on their own. And so I'm thankful that I still get to be a teacher, and just in a different way. Now, one of the other things, though, is you're not just a teacher when you go into business. You're also a student, because the people who've been doing business for a while, when you've been in academia, they picked up other skills and talents that are really valuable that you don't have. like I mentioned, project management stuff beforehand. And so when you make the transition, one of the most important things is to keep that spirit of learning with you and take it to being a student and learn from everyone else that you work with. Because generally speaking, like I've found, like I don't have dumb colleagues, right? Every one of my colleagues is smart in something. And so I need to figure out what their talents are, how they've been able to be successful, and be able to then incorporate that into my toolkit as well. Thank you for your time.
And next up, we'll have Andrea Jones-Rooy.
Hey everyone, can you hear me okay? Cool. Awesome. Well, I'm so excited to be here. It's so great to be with you all. And I just want to second everything that the first three have said, particularly that taking Rob's 699 course or whatever the ICPSR version of that will get you very far in life. And my main conclusion after 10 years or so outside of the academy is if everyone in the world could get through Rob's 699, a lot of our problems would be solved. So that's my shout out there. But I thought what I would share, and I'm happy to talk about kind of the day-to-day and just also, I guess, to second the kind of the points that were made throughout about kind of culture shock. Deadlines are real. You have to, if you work in an office, you have to be in the same place every day. As a student and a professor, I really liked being able to just leave and wander around and come in on days that I taught and spend other times in a cabin thinking my big thoughts. So that was a big change. And then one of the biggest ones for me was, maybe this has changed in academia, but in academia, if you take a few days to reply to an email, no one cares. If you take more than like 20 minutes to reply to an email in a lot of corporate contexts, they will send like teams after you to see if you're okay. So the speed and the culture was very much a shock for me. But what I thought I would talk about, and feel free to tell me not to if this is not of interest, but is it was not an obvious decision for me to leave academia. And so I imagine that there are at least some of you in the audience or who are listening to this who are maybe here because you're thinking maybe a career outside of academia might be interesting, but you don't know for sure. And correct me if I'm wrong and you've all made up your minds. But when I was a PhD student, I went to my PhD program at Michigan not knowing, because I guess I don't know how to do basic research, or I didn't at the time, not knowing that PhDs in political science are largely training you to be a professor. So I sort of went in being like, I don't know what I'll do with this degree. And then while I was there, I was persuaded that being a professor and getting tenure and all those things were like really, really great goals to have. But I also was always curious about the outside world. And so after my PhD, I did a postdoc at Carnegie Mellon, and then I got a faculty job at NYU Shanghai. And I was like on my way to staying in academia. And it wasn't until I was at NYU Shanghai, which was a very new university at the time, and I was the only, not just only political scientist, I was the only quantitative social scientist the entire university of like 100 faculty had hired. There was a lot of humanities and a lot of like finance econ, not like social science econ. Sorry if everyone is finance econ. It's, what it was and then there was like physics and chemistry. So no one even knew what I was doing. And I was very shocked to discover that nobody knew that quantitative research was possible about humans. Like it was just, and maybe it was just where I was and who I was around. And I was just like, I spent forever getting a PhD in this thing and nobody even knows what I'm talking about. Never mind, doesn't know what endogeneity is or regression. Like they just didn't even know you could study things like the dissemination of culture through numbers, right? And so after a few years in this tenure track job, I had a small breakdown and said, I got to get out of academia and I have to see what the world is like. And sorry for the tour of my psyche, but I was like, I'm convinced that everything I learned in graduate school is super important and valuable. But at the time, there was no data science. And if you walk into a room and you tell people you study political science, they're going to tell you about JFK. And so I was like, how am I even going to get a job? And so I did something that I do not recommend, which is I quit with no plan whatsoever and moved to New York City and was like, I'm just going to show up with like my Rob Francis and University of Michigan quantitative tools and like see what there is. And I did some weird stuff. I did some random corporate role play. I did a stint at 538 with like kind of quantitative journalism, which I got by starting as a freelancer and kind of building up. But I was very lucky that one of my dissertation advisors, Scott Page, who's also at Michigan, also did some consulting work. And so he brought me in and I helped design a survey that a large global Fortune 500 company was running at the time to understand. They were still making the business case for diversity. This was like before diversity was cool, that now we're in a post-diversity is cool world, but we were still trying to persuade people that diversity led to collective intelligence. So I did some survey work for them, and I remember just walking around the halls. I'm in New York City, walking around the halls of this big building over by Grand Central and thinking, oh my gosh, everything I learned in graduate school about how governments work and how you understand like principal agent problems and the statistical methods that we're using and the research skills and the research design and everything I learned maps almost perfectly to companies. Companies are basically authoritarian countries. And that's what I've been studying forever and ever and ever. And you can quote me on that. And so from there, I was very fortunate that that project led to other projects and you know, word of mouth. Those people that I worked with started getting jobs at other companies, and I was working with fintech, and I was working with insurance, and I was giving talks, and I was really ended up in a space very organically around using my social science skills to help companies figure out how to measure performance and engagement. And so I was working in the people analytics space quite a bit because measuring humans is basically what we learn to do in a quantitative social science PhD program. And I really loved it. And I realized that from what I saw, this doesn't mean it's everywhere, very smart, very thoughtful people, C-suite people in these big global companies, and I can't say their names, but I swear they're real, didn't know anything about how to think about numbers or data. Many of them maybe don't quote me on this, maybe had like an MBA from somewhere fancy, but like they had a very minimal memory of like correlation is not causation. And that was like sort of the end of it. And even that was like not a given when you'd walk into some rooms. I remember being somewhere where the CEO was talking about, well, you know, a sense of belonging is a clear driver of engagement in this survey. And I was like, what do you mean by driver? And they were like, correlation, 0.9. And I was like, I'm going to die. So everything Derek said about, you know, endogeneity, like you're really, and then another turning point for me was the chief marketing officer at this other company once that we were talking about a machine learning algorithm that they were using to predict the performance, the annual performance scores of their employees. And I was trying to describe to them why that was a bad idea, because it was all data based on the past. And it was, and the guy just looked at me, and well-meaning, smart, thoughtful guy. And he said, but Andrea, how could these numbers be wrong? They're data science. And I was like, oh no, oh, we have some work to do. Around that time, NYU called and said, hey, we're starting a new program in data science. And so I was very lucky to go back to NYU, and I taught an undergraduate course at NYU, New York, called Data Science for Everyone. Because basically at that moment with the CMO, I was like, we got to start sooner. This is too late. So I went back to NYU and taught for a few years. I'm now back out. So basically my point is twofold. One, you don't have to know at this moment whether you're going to go into academia or not. I spent years and years as a graduate student and a junior faculty member trying to decide which way to go. And I even had advisors at that time, not at Michigan, at different places, who told me if you leave academia, it's a train you cannot get back onto. And that's true in some ways. I think if I wanted like a tenured job, that would be very, very difficult. But there are a lot of ways, the university is changing as we speak, sometimes for good and sometimes for not so good. There are a lot of ways to live a life where you weave in and out of academia. So first, just to say, it's not like you choose a path and then that's it forever. And the second is to say that you don't have to even know what form your contributions will take. Like you don't even have to know, I'm going to go work in government. I'm going to go work in consulting. I'm going to go work in whatever. Like there's a very high tolerance in the professional world for movement between industries that wasn't there in the past. And I really do think that if you can go in and say the things that have been so valuable, I think when I finally went into the real world, I thought my value add would be, I can do fancy statistics. I can speak thoughtfully about causality. I can make inferences and all of that kind of stuff. I think my real value is the art and science of research design. It's saying, hey, you, and this is as a consultant, I'm not within a company. This is an external person, say, hey, you're a company that has this problem. You're trying to change people's minds about this. You're trying to get more talented people to want to work at your company and stay at your company. I am going to sit down and be both creative and rigorous in thinking about how to turn that problem into a question that can be at least partially answered, or the knowledge can be furthered on with data. And so it's the research process itself that has, the testing hypotheses, starting with a broad question, narrowing down, going back broad, and then communicating that at every stage. That's the real value add, in a way that rolling in and saying, I can do deep learning, neural networks, yada, yada, yada. Like that kind of stuff gets me in the door. But the thing that I have found that my skill set is most useful for is the actual process of doing research. And then the last thing I'll say is, if anyone wants to talk about, so part of the reason I left the academy, again, is because I'm a horrible Goldilocks, but I love both worlds. And I'm trying now in kind of the fourth act to do more public facing, like, okay, I've talked to the CEOs, I've talked to the undergraduate students. How can I talk to everyone else to think like a data scientist and a social scientist, and basically jam Rob Francis 699 into the brains of more people? So if anyone wants to talk about that kind of stuff, like the more public facing podcasting, stuff like that, there's a lot less money in that, way more money in the corporate world, but I'm happy to talk about that stuff too.
Okay, so we have, well, first of all, let's thank those speakers. That was really awesome. I think it was really awesome, even if they weren't talking about my PS 699 course so quite so much. But we have time for questions from the audience, and I have gathered some before.
So first, Andrea Jones, I come from NYU Shanghai. I was just so impressed because nobody knows it.
Yeah.
Tiny institution. Yeah, yeah. And it's like, is it NYU? Yes, no, okay. But yeah, I wanted to continue on a point that you were talking about weaving in and out of academia. I'm actually like a research assistant for an academic that's not a professor. Like, she's an institutional researcher, researching how there's like how like the university works. But like, I think my biggest fear with like leaving academia is that I'm not going to be able to come back in. And I always thought myself, when I'm 60, I'll be like teaching undergrads. But I also see a lot of people getting back into academia. Like I have a professor right now who was a lawyer for the longest time, and then is like, okay, I'm tired of being a lawyer, now I'm academia. I have another classmate who is just starting his PhD at like 45, I think he is, like, because he was like a major of little city, and then but then he wants to get into academia to like, like, okay, the last stage of his life was going to be in academia. So like, when is it okay to get back into academia, and when is it not possible? Because I've also heard like people keep on saying you have 5 years as an assistant professor, and then like you're gone. Like,
thank you, and go NYU Shanghai. And I bet you all didn't know that if you, I also almost did a whole thing. I was like, here's how I'm going to explain what it is, but I decided to. So I'll let you explain to everyone who wants to know. It's a very cool place. I also bet you all didn't know that if you ask a question, you get zoomed in on by a camera. So very brave for that as well. It's a great question. So I do think, and Rob and others at different universities, please tell me if I'm wrong, but I do think that over the last, again, let's say 10 years or so, I have observed that it has become easier and more common to weave in and out of academia. And part of that might be, I'm biased because my second round in academia was at the NYU Center for Data Science, as opposed to a political science or more traditional social science program. And so it was much more common there to have what they called professors of practice or clinical professors who come in and they work at Meta full time and they teach a course in the evenings. And I have found for the undergraduates, I taught undergraduates, I can't speak for the master's and PhD, but I would imagine it's true for them as well, that the undergraduates really appreciate getting to learn from a mix of professors who both can give them the kind of traditional, thorough walk through thinking like a researcher and preparing to do peer-reviewed work and that level of care in your research, and working with people in industry who can kind of teach you how to straddle both worlds and really put into action a lot of the really important things that my other panelists have talked about. So I think the world is sort of evolving where it's more porous. One thing that is a whole mess is, the world of adjuncting and, trying to make a living teaching 3 different courses at 3 different universities and you don't have health insurance from any of them. Like, I don't want to glamorize any of that. That I think is a real challenge. And there are a lot of like kind of real institutional biases between like, I'm like a tenured faculty member and you're just a rando who teaches one class in the evenings. But I really do think that's changing. And I think the more of us, who are interested in and open to going in and out and demonstrating the value of doing that, both to students and colleagues, I think that that's going to continue to be something that's more normalized and maybe even expected, kind of how in some industries it's very, like if you work at McKinsey, I think it's very common to leave and then 5 years later come back, and they sort of value that. And so I think that's changing. You also might need to find universities that are more open to that. NYU is a university that's in the middle of the city. A lot of our students go into the business world. And so there's just, the business school has a lot of that, and maybe business schools in general are more open to that. So it can vary. There's no hard and fast rule. This is the last thing I'll say about when to go back. I was very fortunate. I literally was thinking when that CMO said that thing, I was like, I got to get back to the classroom. And I was looking up more kind of like 2-year community college type stuff in my area when NYU just happened to call. And I was like, yeah, I'll get back together with my ex. Why not? Right. And it ended up being really fun. But there's no fixed rule. But I will say 2 things, actually. I will say, one, I think, like I said, I don't know that you're still making a choice. Like, I don't think I could get back on a tenure track if I wanted to. I had a brief chat a couple years ago about what that might look like. And it was just like, very hard and not really consistent with what my goals were, where I still wanted to have one foot out. But the other thing I'll say is that I'm increasingly interested in linking peer-reviewed research with the outside world. And so my mountain that I'm on right now is trying to persuade some of my clients, more so in the nonprofit space, to say, hey, you want to run this initiative to like change minds or reduce prejudice? What if we partnered with a faculty member at another university who could get us IRB, blah, 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 and try to actually run both your kind of pro-social intervention and learn something along the way. I haven't sold them on it, but I'm trying to knit together the academic and non-academic world, not just on the teaching side, but on the research side, which is also challenging. But so there's even more than one way to weave between the worlds. I'll leave my answer there.
Yeah, we have more questions, but I will just add to that since Andrea invited me to. So this thought is still forming in my head, but I believe if you have in mind when you say in and out of academia, if you have in mind being a research professor, right, who's competing to get large amounts of research published and move up into some higher ranked or more prestigious research position, that's probably the kind of academia that moving in and out of is not very easy. And I agree with Andrea. I think that's right, that other roles at the university that are extremely important are starting to develop as viable career positions and options. And that's more developed in some, as I said, this is still coming together in my head, but it's more developed in some disciplines than others, right? Like in medicine, right? You have research physicians, and then you have physicians who see patients. You have some who do a bit of both. And there's still, not to sugarcoat anything, because the adjunct teaching thing is exploitative labor, pure and simple at present. Hopefully it's improving. There are teaching professorships at some places in the US. And here's a place where academia, I think, is more advanced in other parts of the world. There have long been real bona fide, for example, research postdoctorate positions and careers. This is something relatively new in social science in the US, to have bona fide postdoctoral research positions. Well, let me not go on too much longer on that, because we have a bunch of other questions as well. In the room? Yep.
Hello, thank you everyone. Just like 1 hour ago, I was having a breakdown because of this topic, so thank you. I have 2 questions. First, for Andrea. I would love to get in touch with you. I'm also in communicating science and communicating evidence. I also speak Spanish, so I think we can do a pretty cool crossover. My second question would be for Derek. You were working in Honduras, which I believe it was with community and directly doing evidence, and then you jumped to Meta, which is more corps and less community based. How did you deal with that? I can imagine that having a family is a primary factor and a very good external motivation, but like, how did you manage the guilt of like leaving communities and going to corps? Thank you.
So just to clarify, you're saying the like guilt of sort of working for communities versus working for a for-profit company?
Yeah.
Okay. So couple things. I'm certainly not I'm certainly not in agreement with all decisions Mark Zuckerberg has made across across time and space. But in my time at WhatsApp, I found, which is the part of Meta that I work for, I found a profound commitment to data privacy, to secrecy, to maintaining the rights of people, to helping disadvantaged people be able to communicate. It sounds like, given your background where you probably lived, I'm sure you know WhatsApp is the primary method of communication for billions of people on this planet. In fact, it has more than 2 billion daily active users. And it is a free surface. And up until very recently, which by the way is after the time I've left there was no advertisement. There was very little revenue generation, and it was essentially run as a nonprofit to aid in communication problems of the world. And lots of these sort of communication, like I worked a lot in rural communities where the level of poverty was much higher than in other parts of the country, which were, again, you know, in countries that were typically very poor, and no other form of communication would work there except WhatsApp. Like, it was their only hope in these areas to be able to communicate and reach people both within their communities, but also outside of it. And WhatsApp, I was always very impressed that from the leadership there, they understood that it was their responsibility to connect all people in the world, regardless of how poor or how difficult it was to communicate given bandwidth and internet issues and cellular signals and all the rest. So I'm very happy and proud of my time at Meta. I hope I helped connect hundreds of millions of more people in different situations and circumstances. And despite what you may like think or what you hear in the news, I can tell you 100% unequivocally, no one is reading your messages in WhatsApp. They're not violating your privacy. They're not storing, like, they don't even have like message pairs stored. Like, they don't even know who's communicating and like, you know, what phone numbers are communicating with whom, or tie it back to names. Their only form of revenue until I left was a program called Click to WhatsApp, which meant for companies that wanted to advertise on Facebook, but were also too small businesses in developing world that were also too poor to have their own websites and be able to have their own infrastructure to be able to handle calls. A lot of those companies, or a lot of those small businesses, wanted to advertise on Facebook, but they wanted for people, after they clicked on an advertisement, to be able to message them on WhatsApp. So this program was called Click to WhatsApp. And all that would happen is people who wanted to interact with an advertisement would then, you know, if they clicked on it, the WhatsApp would pop up and they would send a message to the business. And that was responsible for 100% of their revenue. I left and left Meta before any of those changes over there.
Fantastic, thank you. And I have a question from the chat that said, so this question is that, suppose a person is especially interested in and enjoys the research and the research design part of developing scientific articles. What kinds of job options are there for someone who enjoys political science research in particular? Maybe Raymond, do you have a thought on that?
Sorry, I was replying to the other question there. I guess, so specifically the research design part, so like how to formulate.
I think the question is, suppose you're really interested in political science research and social science research, you know, for the science aspect, it sounds like. What are the connections that you see to academic options?
I mean, you know, the think tank side can be a little bit weird. So, you know, there is I'll put it this way. One of the things that I find great about think tanks, and also kind of somewhat sometimes disappointing about think tanks, is the is the kind of lack of focus on methodology. There's a real opportunity for people in your positions to enter the think tank world, bring in the high level methodological capabilities that you have, as well as I think kind of the breadth of kind of knowledge of the literature, that and provide those injects into the research design, the work that think tanks do. I think the key thing that would differentiate sort of the research design or the scientific part in a think tank or FFRDC like RAND from what you do in academia is the need to consider multiple people. Yes, you have your co-authors. Yes, you have you can have like quite a large set of co-authors, but everybody more or less speaks the same language in academia and has the same kind of understanding the methodology. That's not true in a whole bunch of other organizations. And so when you're thinking about the research design, how do you incorporate different people who have different research skill sets, is I think as a management, it evolves from a analytical challenge to a management challenge. So, I think the largest project I ever worked on at RAND was like 75, 85 people. And so how you manage that, the research design, it becomes just much, much more complicated because you're starting to deal with so many more additional people. Sorry, I don't know if that was quite the answer, but I hope that helps.
Maybe I could add a little something here. It really resonated with me what Andrea said earlier about this point. And like ultimately why businesses care about you, why they want to hire you, is because they realize that sorry, can everyone hear me? I wasn't sure if, they care about you because they have questions and you have a systematic way to get to answers. And so Andrew talked about like sitting down with a client and being like, okay, so here's like, why don't you explain to me the problems you're having? And let's narrow this down to a single question that we can try to get a signal on and we can try to get you an answer about. And then how you go about providing that answer and how you walk through the scientific method and explore different research projects that will maximize the value for the company. That's what your value is. And I'd say one of the key differences between business world and academia in this regard is just the sheer volume of them you have to do. Like currently, my company and our research project tracker, we have 46 projects currently ongoing. And so each one of those require a separate research design and analysis. And make no mistake, before anyone who works for me does a research project, like they have to submit a research design that walks through, like what is the problem? What is the problem statement? What are your hypotheses? How do you plan to go about executing this? What types of analysis do you plan to do? Like this is all stuff that ends up getting reviewed and criticized, and then you go into launching and figuring it out, an analysis, the conclusions, impact, and then move on. So that research design element is a key portion of what I think all researchers do in business. It's how do we get a signal on to provide an answer to the specific question that business stakeholders have.
I've got another one here that is, are there different, and Anna Maria, I might put this one to you because you said something in your presentation that I wanted to see if you could elaborate on a little bit. You talked about how there were different procedures or avenues or strategies one might take if they want to get into government jobs in particular. So are there conferences, job fairs, or other kinds of venues where folks interested in applying for these kinds of positions should go to? Or is it exclusively send an anonymous application kind of thing?
So sending an anonymous application to anything is always a bit of a risk. That doesn't mean you have to have a deep in to kind of know what to look for. I think the biggest challenge we have with people when they're filling out a federal application is they don't follow the directions. And they think it's going to be like, they think it's okay if they don't submit the transcript that's actually formal, or they think it's okay to kind of waffle one or two questions instead of answering it exactly. And if everyone just followed the darn directions, like that gets you 90% of the way, right? Your goal is to get past the person screening the application to get you to somebody who can evaluate your skills and how they apply to the job. That's really a simple thing. There are resources you can find online. There are federal job seeking things. We actually, another senior executive at GAO who went to the Ford School at Michigan regularly hosts at the Ford School how to apply to federal jobs seminar. We can share those slides or some of those tips, but really follow the directions is the big one.
I can add one
Awesome.
small thing, if you all can hear me, just to say that one thing that was very surprising to me was how much personal connections matter. And this is outside, I can't speak to federal government, but every opportunity I've gotten from even my second round in academia, frankly, or like placing an article in a public facing publication, or like a random invitation to a conference that led to meeting someone. Like I ended up getting my job at 538 because I was at a career thing and I said loudly, what I really want to do is science journalism. And someone heard me and said, oh, my friend is the editor at, and it's talked about in the US, like it feels like corruption, or like in China, like guanxi, or like relying on like, but it is how the world works. And I've also done the thing where I submitted all kinds of cover letters and resumes, and maybe I didn't fill out the form correctly. That's very possible. Or maybe I just need a better resume. I've never gotten an opportunity from like formally applying to anything. So do not underestimate the power of word of mouth, and don't be shy about going to friends or colleagues or former professors and being like, hey, you know someone who works at this place, like, could you possibly help me connect with them? Like, I've been stunned at how much that matters.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that very quickly, I think thinking about government positions as well, like there is the usajobs.gov website. I've never been successful that way, but it works. The other way to consider is also the SES side, right? Specifically for US government jobs, you could get appointed. And it dovetails with both the networking. So I'll put it this way. My old office mate when I worked for the National Democratic Institute is Colin Call's wife. I didn't know at the time, but so I this was a long time ago, but I had kind of a front row seat to see how Colin ended up getting into government work and then kind of going from there. And a lot of it was just they were really strong supporters of Obama. When he was still a senator, I wasn't sure that he was going to actually make it into the White House. But that sort of network slash, it's not just a kind of career focused network, but especially for government positions, there's a way to like leverage your connections to political parties as a way to kind of transition into an appointed position is it the Plum Book, I think? Just the list of appointed positions that are available. So also consider that as well.
Awesome. Well, we have hit time, and I have 15 minutes to get to my class that's 20 minutes away from here. So we're going to thank our panelists who were really awesome. There's been active responses and chatting going on the side on this. So when the recording comes from you, if you're here in the live audience, I would encourage you to take a look also at the recording that comes through. They'll have even more discussion. Thank you again, guys. It was wonderful seeing all of you. And as I warned you, I'm now running. So